All right, AP Hug, we are trying to get this thing wrapped up. Still got a little way to go here, and so we're gonna see if we can crank out. I don't know, another three, maybe four slides. I don't know. We'll see. And there might be some overlap here. Wasn't too sure how much we were going to get in class, and so if we were able to get any further than the bottom of this slide, then you're just going to kind of fast forward things to catch up to where we left off. Okay, because we are going to I'm going to start you off as if maybe we didn't get this far, and so we're going to start with number 4, and newly industrialized countries. Yeah, another acronym for you. NICs. All right, is what we're looking at for this one. And so pretty explanatory there. And if you, again, another one of your vocab terms from your list there. And usually what we talk about is these are countries that aren't going to necessarily be like a full-on highly developed country, an HDC, but at the same time, they're moving beyond being what we call a less developed country. And so they are countries that have begun to introduce, factories and industries, uh, but still, their overall economic development hasn't reached the full level of a highly developed country like, the United States, that kind of a thing. Okay. So, we have that element to also throw into the mix as we're looking at all of our different kind of just, again, we're still on our topic, just kind of looking at the bigger picture of, just world economy, where globalization, kind of comes in with all that sort of thing. All right. All right. Consumption. When we talk about consumption in Unit 7, we're talking specifically, using resources that people, when it gets into the area of wants and needs, and the resources necessary to make sure that people get what they want or what they need. And so when we look at things like what we have right here, income and energy, what we tend to see is, when I say skews, it means that when we look at highly developed countries, we are going to see higher incomes. We're also going to see higher energy consumption. Okay, you think of the United States as a highly developed country, and all the stuff we got to plug in, and all that kind of yeah. And so we consume far more than many other countries out there. But there's a trade-off in there as well. We also have higher average incomes than a lot of people, so we're able to afford some of that extra consumption. All right. Environmental impacts when it comes to whether we're comparing HDCs and LDCs. When it says skew even, it means that whether you're looking at a country that is highly developed or lower developed, each of them have their certain areas that they impact the environment. And when I say impact, mainly what I'm referring to usually is going to be negative impacts. Whether it's going to be pollution, air pollution, water pollution, those kinds of things. And I think a lot of times in our own mind, we want to think, well, that must be much worse in a less developed country. But actually, we see even in highly developed countries with a lot of industry that those industries produce a lot of a product that ends up having environmental impact. So yeah, kind of even Steven when it comes to that. All right. Definitely, unfortunately, when we look at less developed countries, that's where we see that they're still trying to catch up a lot of times in healthcare and things like that. And so, your economy is influenced by mortality rates. If you're thinking, population pyramid, and you're thinking that, mortality rates, whether they be, infant mortality rates, which, no, okay, I was just double checking. I was trying to remember. It's like, did I have something in there about that or not? Infant mortality rates, or mortality rates that impact, people of an older age and limits how long they can work, things like that. Those are all part of the puzzle here, okay? And definitely is going to skew towards the LDCs on that, right? Let's see, downsides of interdependence. So this is like when we get back, if we're thinking about globalization, this idea that, we've kind of shrunken down the planet, through the use of communications and transportation, and that we have this tighter level of relationships between countries because of that. And we've seen a lot of upsides of globalization. It's given us a plethora of cheap consumer goods that we can buy in our stores, and everything from the cheap clothing that we're used to wearing, and being able to afford to you know video game systems, and our phones. I mean, everything that is a direct result of globalization and that interdependence. We get the things we want, and all things being even, we get them at a fairly affordable price. All right. But yeah, as number six is describing, there's a problem with that, and that is when we have some kind of an event take place, where you're going to see something start in one country and potentially spread to another, or where that one country then has kind of like this domino effect where it affects others. When COVID first struck, those of you that don't recall your COVID-19 history, you may recall it started in China. Okay, and who is our number one trading partner? It's China. And so for those of you that still have those good memories of those days of us trying to murder each other to get a roll of toilet paper, that kind of stuff. That we saw the dark side of globalization there. It was like we had become so interdependent on China and some other countries that we import a lot of goods from, and then suddenly we couldn't get it. Okay, ports are closed down. The Chinese, they closed down their ports, so no ships were getting out. I mean, everything came to a dead stop. And ports on the west coast here that usually ships in, ships out, containers heading out to different states and heading off to stores, and it was all gone. All right, all gone. And for those who are anti-globalization, and you even look at kind of in our current political scene right now in 2025, there's a strong call coming from leadership in America right now that we need to become more independent, that we maybe became too much interdependent. And then others who say that there is a middle ground there where you can still have some of that interdependence and still have that connection with other countries, but at the same time not going completely so overboard that if something goes sideways, if something bad happens, where you can't even take care of yourself, right? So that's what we're talking about there. All right, changing global economy. We're going to kind of change gears here. So automation, basically robotics. When this is one of the big things that we've seen going here into the 21st century is the computerization of industry has accelerated. And so when we look at manufacturing, and whether we're talking in highly developed countries or lower developed countries, that has really played a major role in changing how manufacturing happens. We talked about Fordism, going back to the good old days of assembly lines. Automation still, some elements of automation still take advantage of assembly line, that kind of production process. Others go into more of that post-Fordism, where it's a little bit more customizable. But that is definitely something that has represented a huge change in the global economy, especially in HDCs. But again, we're starting to see it more and more in LDCs because there's more and more industry opening up in those. Okay, all these newly industrialized countries, they're making as well. All right. And let's see, coming out of that, yes, there are pros, there are cons, isn't there, to everything? And automation has allowed for the making of goods at even lower prices. And again, we love those low prices because that stretches our dollars and and makes life a little bit easier to live, right? So if automation, and think about it, folks. I mean, with automation, no longer are you having to pay someone $20 an hour or even $10 an hour or even $3 an hour, because now you've got basically a robot that is doing the work. Okay, and that is one of those things that really cuts a massive part of the labor that goes into production of anything. That's gone, and so that's more profit for the company, number one, all right, especially after they've paid off the investment they've made for all that automation, and once that's all taken care of, I mean, it's just more pure profit for them. But it also allows them to compete more easily out there in world markets by lowering their consumer prices. And people are going to gravitate towards their widgets, all right, if we're going to use that term again, and buy their widgets because they're cheaper than the competitors who maybe are still using traditional assembly production methods, not using automation, using humans, that sort of thing, all right? The cons is that we've seen automation result in even more low-paying jobs when it comes to industry. As you know, as companies who are trying to compete against automated companies have to figure out ways of closing that gap, and one of the ways is to pay your employees less. And so that puts that pressure for the humans that are still doing that work. And suddenly, their lives are made much more complicated and difficult to live. And then job insecurity is just that idea that, if a company is going along, a factory is trying to do it the old fashioned way, still using humans. And finally, they cannot compete. Their competitors are just cleaning them out. They may make that final decision that, we got to automate too. If we're going to keep up, we're either going to go bankrupt and just go out of business, or we're going to have to automate. And when they make that decision to automate, it's going to going hand in hand with that is going to be issuing pink slips, telling those humans working in the factory, your days are numbered. In 60 days, in 90 days, next year, we are going to shift to automated production, and you will no longer have a job. So that's definitely some of the cons that come out of it. All right. And let's see, next topic to tackle is, yes, the new International Division of Labor is a term, again, another one of your vocab terms. And Division of Labor is just kind of specialization is really what it's all about. And so that, whatever task you have going on in any kind of system within an economy, it's, that everyone kind of knows what their area of expertise is, okay? Whether that's different businesses, whether that's the people that work within the businesses, but there's this specialization where, instead of everyone, you try to have everyone that knows a little bit of everything, which can lead to inefficiency. No, you're going to specialize in areas, and the people that know those areas, or the parts of that industry that specialize in that, they are going to be, boom, it's like expert level. And a lot of times what that will do is, well, number one, like I just mentioned, efficiency. That's a big one, because when your factory, when your industry, when your business is running at high efficiency, that means you're going to make more money. Okay, remember, we talked about it, profit, profit, profit. At the end of all this, we're always about trying to make money. Okay, and so here's what we see. And it'll be interesting to see how this continues to be in a post-COVID world, and now in a world where the United States, at least at the moment, it could change with the next election, but at the moment, the United States talking about backing away from some of the globalization policies that we've been following really since about the 1960s, 1970s. All right, so this is how we see this division of labor, at least until recently, and that is that where you have those major highly developed countries, United States. We get lumped in there as one of those core HDCs, that we're the ones that because we have an excellent education system, we have some of the best universities in the world. And so, it makes it easy for a lot of that research and development to take place here. And so, this is where the main concepts and the ideas are originally, where they're going to come together is going to be in a country like ours or any other highly developed country that has that kind of, built into their system. And then you're going to find your middle income countries. Sometimes these are going to be our newly industrialized countries, or NICs. Sometimes it's just going to be countries that, they're not the big and powerful, but they still, they do a lot of manufacturing. And so a lot of times once those ideas and concepts have been finalized, that's where the production is going to take place. Okay, they're going to find a country where you don't have to pay top dollar like you're going to pay here in America for an employee. Most Americans are going to demand $20, $25, $30, $40 an hour. But you can go to a middle income country and they might only want 10 an hour. Okay, so you're going to do that. You're going to do that what we talked about, that offshoring, that outsourcing, that kind of thing is going to take place, right? And so they take part care of that. So again, we're dividing, the job so far, into two. And then we'll see where the LDCs come in. And Africa still plays a big role with this, and that is that they still are playing their role with supplying the raw materials, the natural resources that are going to be needed for the manufacturing process. And don't walk away thinking Africa is the only one. Africa is a good example to use if you end up having to write about this on an FRQ or something. But there's definitely other LDCs out there that do this as well. Some in Southeast Asia, that kind of thing. And so their part of the whole system is they're going to be shipping that stuff out from their countries, and then it will arrive where the manufacturing takes place. All right. Okay. Let's see. Jumping back into an old term, transnationals. Hey, we learned about that back in Unit 4. Is where we first started jumping into that. And then we'll specialize here in this export processing zones. Should have highlighted all of zones. You notice these little things went, oh well. All right. And export processing zones. Let's see, what do I have here? All right, yeah, I know, transnationals again. Yeah, remember, transnational is a business like Starbucks, like a lot of our big American business, McDonald's, that extend across national boundaries, right? So you're traveling, on the other side of the world, but again and again you see, hey, I recognize that place from America. It's from home, that kind of a thing, all right? Whether it's in Asia, whether it's, in Africa, whether it's in Europe, yeah, transnationals, okay? But here's where we dig into what the again, another acronym, EPZs are, okay? Export Processing Zones. And a lot of times we're going to see these in our less developed countries, all right? And they are zones that are developed. Hold on just a sec here. All right, these are, sorry, had a dog that I think had to go outside. These are zones, so a little piece of territory that usually is going to be designated in a less developed country. Usually it's going to be a foreign interest or business that's going to be behind this. They are going to arrange with that country. Okay, it's not like they're invading. It's like, hey, we're taking over some of your land. No, they're cooperating. They're working in cooperation with the leaders of that country to say, hey, you guys are going to set aside this little chunk of land for us, which will become an export processing zone. All right. And then what we're going to do is, we're going to set up some business in there that is going to basically be able to take advantage of the things that you manufacture or the natural resources that you have in your country. And we will set up a port. And a lot of times what you can find in these export processing zones is you're going to find a port or a harbor, that sort of thing. And so where some shipping can be taking place. And the foreigners will come in. These foreign businesses will come in. They'll invest. They're the ones who are going to build it all. The country itself doesn't have to really do much of anything other than say, all right, here's the land, here's the port. Do what you want. And yeah, how and as I try to summarize there in very few words. This is going to help those foreign businesses because it's going to allow them to gain access to those natural resources in a way that's going to be more affordable to them and kind of drop their bottom line and increase their profit margin, right? And then these EPZs can also look really attractive to the countries themselves because usually in developing an EPZ, these foreign businesses are going to promise jobs to local people, right? And so, in an LDC that maybe is struggling to employ all of its population, this is definitely, is very enticing to them to create these. They sometimes can be a little controversial because sometimes when those foreign countries move in and set up those EPZs, then they kind of use their influence. And they may ask, favors of the government to, if there's rules and regulations. And hey, could you kind of maybe give us, a break on some of these? Maybe, tell us, that we don't have to follow certain rules because it'll really make it easier for us to run our business here, which will make it easier for us to hire your people to work in our business. All right. So it's one of those that, in theory should kind of be good for everyone. But like I said, sometimes there can be a little bit of some kind of, matter of fact, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Those EPZs can do that. And definitely, here, I'm going to get both these up there. There we go. And we definitely see in the use of EPZs that women quite often are picking up some of those jobs. I know that, it would seem like, well, it's a port and shipping and all that thing. It seems like one of those traditional man jobs. But we see in a lot of those countries that make use of EPZs that there's actually openings then that pop open for women. And as we always talk about, remember in all of our units, in AP Hug, and one of those things to keep always in the back of your mind as you get ready for the AP test is they always like to focus a little time because, again, in social studies, oftentimes the role of women gets kind of minimized, gets overlooked, and College Board is saying we're trying not to do that. Okay, and so yeah, all right. And then the con is what I was just talking to you about. Okay, sometimes in those EPZs, the jobs can, they say, hey, we can employ your people. You don't necessarily say they're going to be great paying jobs, and so sometimes, it's a job, but you might have to go find a second one because it's not paying very well. All right. And then, like I said, sometimes those kind of cozy relationships that that those businesses are going to make with government. That's what opens the door to what some people call 21st century imperialism. Is that when those foreign businesses are using their influence in this LDC, it's kind of reminiscent of back in the days when, in a lot of these businesses, they're coming from LDCs, they're coming from European countries, they're coming from the United States, that sort of thing. And sometimes their practices can seem a little bit familiar, going back to the days when, Europeans were establishing all their colonies all over the world. And so it's been given kind of that nickname, 21st century imperialism, because sometimes it does kind of walk a thin line between, is this right? Is this fair? Or is this corruption? Is this kind of like getting into a gray area where it's really legal the way that these businesses are pushing their influence in the governments of the countries where they've set up their EPZs. All right, there we go. Okay. Let's shift from there to a completely different direction, and we'll take a look at post-industrial landscape. This is something that we definitely have had to face up to here in the United States since the 1970s, as we've watched ourselves become less and less and less of a manufacturing country and more of, tertiary, and where we're, service-based and all that sort of thing, okay? And so this is just a little bit of, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the fact that, we have areas all over the United States, particularly over in kind of the Midwest and closer to the East Coast? Do we see a lot of scenes like you see there of abandoned factories, abandoned warehouses, and then sometimes abandoned businesses around them because those were businesses that were there, to serve those factories, that kind of thing. And so when we talk about this post-industrial landscape, it presents a lot of challenges. What do we do with all these abandoned buildings? Do we just bulldoze them all? Well, that's expensive. And what do you do with all the debris? It's sometimes it's dangerous debris. If it's a factory that worked with arsenic or mercury or other chemicals that were dangerous, then you can't just bulldoze and say, okay, someone build something new. I mean, it's basically at that point you're looking at some environmental damage, and you have to do a proper cleanup of it. But at the same time, post-industrial landscapes do present some opportunities, and so kind of a chance to, well, it's a new world, and so let's shift away from that. Okay. The pictures you are seeing there are the examples of what we, just were learning about in Unit 6 with brownfields. Again, these dilapidated buildings that kind of, show that those signs of decay and, the kind of life has moved on. And then that part of the world I was talking to about, or part of the United States, kind of gets into usually what referred to, Northeast United States. I wouldn't call it New England, but Northeast and around the Great Lakes area, right? So we're getting into, some parts of Pennsylvania, Ohio, areas like that, Michigan, where there was a lot of car manufacturing way back when there was a lot of other factories that were manufacturing goods in the United States that we now buy from other countries. Okay. And so, that's been one of the downsides of what we call this Rust Belt. These countries that are these states that have been so impacted by all of this. Okay, now the opportunities in areas where they have gone ahead and demolished those brownfields, demolished those old buildings, done the proper cleanup, done the proper debris removal. Some of those areas have been replaced by corporate parks and corporate campuses. And these are usually a company will create one of these, and it kind of becomes like a headquarters for a corporation. The picture I have over there, I know it's kind of squint your eyes, and you're thinking like, what are these gigantic circly balls that are down? That's a corporate park. And I'll be honest with you, I forget at this point in time which company created that. But it's a site on the site of where there used to be some old dilapidated factories. They got rid of those, and they created this beautiful, very very kind of eye-catching architecture, and made their headquarters out of it. And so sometimes you'll see that kind of thing going on, and parks and campuses refer to that. Usually they sprawl over a nice little chunk of land, maybe a few blocks of city real estate, that kind of thing. It's the opposite of just doing like what they're sitting next to, a high rise. Instead, they kind of spread out a little bit more. And in those cities where there's a lot of those brownfields, there's plenty of land available to do something like that. And so some companies have taken advantage and done that sort of thing. There's some examples of some of them for you. And some of them you recognize. Nike, which has their own corporate park out in Beaverton, right outside of Portland. Amazon, which in Seattle, has now completed their campus, and it's the same idea. Google down in California, and and they go all in with these places. A lot of them on those campuses, they kind of encourage their employees to kind of live their lives at work. They set up they just don't have a cafeteria. They've got nice restaurants for their employees. They have state-of-the-art gyms for their employees. I mean, they invest heavily into these things to basically in a way keep their employees close to work. And especially I mentioned with these three, Google and Amazon especially are kind of known for you have to be careful with those kind of employers, because sometimes next thing you know, you're working 70 hours a week and getting paid for 40. Yeah, that kind of a thing. All right. And we definitely don't know where this is going post pandemic. The big shift to working remote. Google actually they shut down their campus, and I believe they've been recently slowly starting to restart it. We've seen just really just in the past year, have we started to see one company after another say, all right, it's time for everyone to come back. Amazon, a good example of that. A lot of people not too happy to go back because they kind of got used to working remote. And now it's kind of like, all right, no, it's back to the old days. And I put the question mark in there because we don't know 100% how that's going. There's still plenty of Americans who are working remote rather than in a factory, in a skyrise, in a corporate park, that sort of thing. My younger son who works in advertising, he's remote. My sister who works for Microsoft, she's remote. So we're somewhere kind of there in the middle there, which would explain my question mark. All right, technopoles. All right, so basically another one of your vocab terms, and it is a city that we describe as a hub. Okay, so in other words, it's kind of like a central point. And usually with technopoles, we're going to focus first on techno, all right, technology. And so these are always going to be those either cities, towns, developments, whatever it's going to be, but it is all about information based, high tech, that kind of thing. And a lot of times we're going to find that they are placed a little bit closer to universities that educate students on what they're going to need to work for these technology information based companies. But the technopoles themselves is the name that we give to either a city or a region where all of this is located. And so you've got one big example there on the right side, Silicon Valley, probably the original technopole, okay, when you get right down to it. But there's others that you could throw into the list there when we're thinking about technopoles. I'm thinking here of Seattle with Amazon and Microsoft is pretty much known as a technopole. Boston, because they have a lot of tech there, and they also have a very a lot of universities in Boston. There's one in Malaysia that's called Cyberjaya. And so, they're really jumping in on the whole, the internet and that sort of thing. But whenever you have these either cities, towns, or regions develop, and they are like that, that's what you got going on. All right, so I'm going to just finish off. I know we're crossing that 30-minute mark, but I'm just going to go ahead and finish off this one last little section here, okay? And so I'm still on my topic of this post-industrial landscape, where we see the creation of corporate parks, where we see the creation of technopoles. We also see an advantage that comes from those, or a more opportunity. And that's what we call the spin-off effect, okay? The spin-off effect is like the multiplier effect that we talked about earlier in the unit. And that is, where you see a technopole created, where you see these corporate parks, hey, there's going to be a bunch of people working there. People with ideas for where what kind of a business I want to establish a successful business. What are you going to do? You're going to find a business that is going to be able to tie in with that technopole or those corporate parks, and you're going to take advantage. So, maybe with those corporate parks, restaurants, again, gas stations, stores, a barber shop, anything that people who work in a place, and maybe people especially who work lots of hours, that'll make their life a little more convenient. All right. So the creation of those kinds of businesses and the jobs connected to them, that is what we call the spin-off effect. Okay. And then the downside of that is the backwash effect. All right. Another term I didn't get completely highlighted. And that is that sometimes this kind of is almost a connection back to brain drain. Okay. Because sometimes we'll see that a technopole may draw a lot of people, the skilled people, to go work in that area. And then what it's going to do in the area around it is, other companies that maybe need the use of some of those skilled employees, they're not there because, they're all working in that one, city or that one region because, hey, it's a target rich environment. There's plenty of job opportunities for them there. And so they go where the jobs are at. And the backwash effect is what other areas around the technopole or what other areas around a corporate park and campuses may have to end up with, deal with in a negative way. Okay, as the people go. Like I said, it's like a version of brain drain, right? That we learned about back there in Unit 2. Alrighty, and then the last thing I'll throw out there, kaboom, and then we'll call it good. All right. And that is where government comes into all of this, okay? When we're talking about globalization, world markets, all that kind of thing, and so definitely have played a larger and larger role. I talk about government giving tax breaks to businesses. That happens oftentimes. A state will try to lure a big business. Maybe Boeing wants to open up a new aircraft construction plant. And so states will compete to get that plant to come to their state because it's more jobs, it's, spin-off effect and, multiplier effect, and, it's going to help their economy. And so a lot of times what to say is that, hey, the business tax rate in our state is like 8%, okay? If you come to our state, we will lower that 8% for you and you alone down to 3%, all right? We will save you that, all the other businesses, they're going to have to do it. But we're going to give you that break, Okay. Other times, governments, state governments, local governments will offer direct financial assistance. If you need money to help open that business here, we'll loan you that money, and you can pay us back, later on. Okay. All those kinds of things, regulations. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, it's a rule about, the businesses have to kind of do this thing and that thing around here. But, if you'll come and relocate in our county, our city, our state, we can kind of look the other way on those regulations for you. Okay. So yeah, a lot of, making a lot of exceptions to a lot of rules and that kind of thing that a lot of times happens to lure business to go to a specific area. Very, very, very common, and especially when it's going to be a business that's going to bring a lot of jobs. The competition between states or cities can get really, really fierce as they work to try to gain those. Okay, that's where I'm going to hit the brakes, folks. Okay, I think from there we're going, oh yes, measures of development. You're going to learn all about gross national product and gross domestic product. Oh yeah, all the GNP and GDP and all those kinds of things. Oh, fun. But that'll be waiting for us when we get back together on Tuesday. All right. So until then, just hang on. All right. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. All right. Okay. We'll see you later.